Okay, wage structure is mostly about inequality. Okay, so in this class, first we will see the how the earnings are distributed and how to measure inequality. Okay, there are some measures that try to see how unequal the earnings or wages are. And then we talk about the wage structure of Korea since 1980s, which is actually applicable much more generally to a lot of countries. And then we will look at the inequality across generations. Okay. So first, let's start with the distribution of earnings. Okay, so if you look at the data, the earnings are distributed like this. So this is from 2011 data. So this is a distribution of monthly earnings of wage earners, excluding business owners. Okay, self-employed. It's only for the employees. And this is how the earnings distribution look like. What you can see here is that most of them are concentrated around here. Okay, and then we have a small number of people, very small number of people like this, who earn actually much more than average. Okay. And this is for the monthly earnings. Also, we divided their monthly earnings by their monthly hours of work, so we have like hourly wage, hourly earnings, basically the same, pretty much the same diagram. And what you can see here is that there are distributions that look like this. Okay, so in general, the distribution is gonna look like, for example, like in this case, fraction and earnings, and it's more like something like this. Okay. So if you look at the textbook page 289, and there is a figure 7-1 for the U.S. wage distribution 2010. Okay. Basically, what you can see is basically the same shape. Okay. So this type of shape is very general, not only in our country, but also in most countries, and probably in other times as well, that earnings distribution look like this. Okay. So in most countries, so as you can see that earnings distribution is, this shape of distribution is called skewed to the right. Okay. So skewed to the right just means that there is this distribution has a tail which is quite long. Okay. So you think of it as some type of animal. Okay. This is head. This is tail. So tail is quite long to the right. Okay. And obviously the skew to the left is the other way. Okay. And if it's not skewed, we call it symmetric. Okay. So symmetric and skewed are the two opposite meanings. Okay, so most of the earnings distributions are skewed to the right. Okay. In most countries, in most times. So it means that most workers in total earnings distribution on relative, compared to these top earners, most of them earn relatively low earnings. Okay, so compared to these group of people, and the small number of workers in the upper tier of distribution receive a very large portion of total income. Okay, if add everybody's income, okay, into a big pile, and see what fractions of those total income people get, and what you can see here is that these people who have very large income, okay, the fraction is very small, but their share of total income is very large. Okay? So that is not only, okay, strain, that is basically common to most of the countries. If you look at the table 7-1 in the textbook, page 290, and what it shows the percentage of total income received by bottom 10% of the households. Okay, so if you line all the households by their income level, again you have a bottom 10%. Okay, so in the bottom 10% gets, for example, Australia only 2% of the total income. Okay, and now if you pick any other any country that is much lower than 10%, like France 3%, Hungary like 4%, Italy 2%, Sweden you think it's very equal country, but it's still only 4%. UK 2%, United States 2%. And in contrast, if you look at the percentage of total income received by top 10% of the households, okay, it's not 10%. Australia 25%. Like Chile, like 42%. Chile is a very unequal country. 42%. Like France 25%. Like something like that. If you go to Sweden, Sweden is a very equal country, but it's still 22%. Okay? So top group, okay, gets large share of income, and bottom group gets very small share of income. So in short, the earnings distribution is unequal. Okay? So if it's perfectly equal, bottom 10% should get what percent of total income? 10%. Top 10% should get 10%. If it's a perfectly equal society, right? So every household has the same income. Then bottom 10%, there is no distinction between bottom and top anyway. Okay? But in reality, that's not true. So what is the reason? Okay, you may think it's something like a society or something like man-made, maybe. But it's difficult to explain why basically every country has this unequal income distribution. Okay? So the standard explanation of it is to use the human capital investment model. Okay? So the idea comes like this. Okay, people have different abilities. Okay? And from human capital investment model, we know that higher ability people invest more in human capital. Okay? So people with higher ability will earn higher income first because they have high ability. Okay? So even if they get the same education, even if everybody gets the same education, as long as there is a difference in income, difference in ability, higher ability individual will earn more than lower ability people. Okay? So one comes from the ability difference. Okay? And on top of that, we know that individuals do not get the same amount of education or do not invest in the same amount of human capital. Right? Their investment in human capital is different. Okay? Usually, higher ability people invest more in human capital. So not only they earn more income because they earn more income not only because they have higher ability, but because they invest more in human capital. Right? So ability and human capital investment basically reinforces each other. Okay? So in that sense, if you are on the top of the ability distribution, okay, you have higher income because of ability, plus you have more investment in human capital, you get higher return. Okay, more return from it, so you tend to be around here. Okay? And if you have low ability, you tend to be around here. Okay? Basically, this ability and human capital difference stretches out the distribution to the right. Okay? So, you know, if we have like most people of the average ability, then we have small number of people who have higher ability, and these higher ability people will earn much more income than average individuals. Okay? So that is the basic, you know, explanation of why the earnings distributions are unequal. Okay? So what we know is that earnings distribution is unequal. Okay? But the degree of inequality, okay, can be different from society to society. Okay? Not every country has the same earnings distribution or income distribution. That's why we need to measure the inequality. Okay? So, in a way that if we draw like a earnings distribution, something like this, then we can see that, okay, this is more equal than this distribution. Okay? More concentrated on the same level of income. Okay? So actually we can use some type of diagram to show the inequality. Okay? So we can use different diagrams, but one of the most, probably not one of the most popular diagram that is used to show the income distribution is called the Lorenz curve. Okay? Lorenz curve is much more easier to interpret than this type of diagram. Okay. How do we draw a Lorenz curve? Okay, so I will just show you a diagram and explain using that way. Okay, how do we do that? Okay, we in table 7-1, we have seen that the share of income for the bottom 10%, share of income for the top 10%, right? Basically, we basically does the same thing with this Lorenz curve. What do we do? Okay, let's say we have households in our society, okay, and then we line them up from the lowest income to the highest income, as we said. So then we can, you know, get like a bottom 10% or bottom 1% or whatever number. Okay? Then we match their share of income. Okay? So in this case, in the horizontal axis, we have the share of the households. Okay? The vertical axis, we have the share of income. Okay? It should be there, share of income. Okay. So this, you can think of it, share of households, think of it as the poorest to the richest. Okay? And as you can see that first, in a hypothetical society that has the same income, every household has the same income, then we know that, let's say, bottom 20% should get what percent of the income? Should get 20% of the total income. Okay? The 40%, so up to 40%, okay, you accumulate, 40% should get 40%. Okay? 50% should get 50, 70% 70, and 100%, obviously 100% gets 100%. So, as you can see, that this red line is the relationship between the share of households and share of income if every household has the same income. So perfectly equal society will have this red line. Okay? But in reality, that's not true. Okay? In reality, usually the bottom gets lower than their actual share of households. So in this case, for example, 20% of the households, bottom 20%, does not get 20%, below 20%, okay? Let's say 5% or something, okay? And then 40%, this is a bottom 40%, okay? Gets not 40%, lower than 40%, okay? Then 60%, not 60%, lower than 60%, okay? Get that? So as you can see that actually this curve should be below the 45 degree line. Okay, and we call these curves Lorenz curve. This red one is a Lorenz curve of perfectly equal hypothetical society. Okay? And then this actual blue one, which is below the 45 degree line, is, you know, it's a one example of actual Lorenz curve. Okay? Lorenz I think he was an American economist. Okay, so he invented this curve, so we call it the Lorenz curve. Okay? So this is a way of showing the inequality in a neat way. Okay? This is a pretty neat way of showing it, because if this Lorenz curve is close to 45 degree line, then we can say it's more equal. Okay? If it's farther away from the 45 degree line, then we can say it's more unequal. Okay? So you can compare the Lorenz curves to see how the how equal or how unequal this society is. So, for example, like one society has this Lorenz curve, and the other society has, let's say, this Lorenz curve, then yellow and red. Which one is more equal? Yellow is more equal. Okay? So this is how you use the Lorenz curve to judge, okay, what society has more equal income distribution, more unequal income distribution. Okay, that's interesting. But there is a problem with the Lorenz curve. It's because that Lorenz curve, you know, it's a cumbersome. You have to draw the curve, okay, and then you have to see visually. So it's probably more easier to have a number, not a graph. Okay, so number is much more, you know, it takes less space and it's easier to see. So using the Lorenz curve, people actually use more often the Gini coefficient, not the Lorenz curve itself. You will see from time to time the Lorenz curve actually in some documents, but usually you will see the Gini coefficient. What is the Gini coefficient? Gini coefficient is just directly comes from the Lorenz curve. The idea here is, as the society gets more unequal, but you can see the area between this 45 degree line and the actual Lorenz curve. Okay? Okay, that looks like a banana. Okay? Gets bigger and bigger. Okay? So the idea is just you know, to show this area, okay, use this area as the measure of the inequality. Okay? So the actual way of measuring it is that basically they calculate this area divided by the total area of this triangle. Okay? Why do they, you know, just divide it by this total triangle? Because it makes the number between 0 and 1. Okay? It's much more easier. Okay? Just to use only the numbers, because by dividing this number, this area by this area of the total triangle, we can make it into 0 and 1. Okay, so it's much more easy to understand. So if it's close to 0, then it means more equal or more unequal. If that coefficient becomes closer to 0, it's more equal. Okay, and it becomes closer to 1, it's more unequal. Okay, so larger number means more unequal. Smaller number means more equal. Okay, And that number is called Gini coefficient. Okay? Gini is, I think he's an Italian economist. Okay? Mainly known for Gini coefficient. Okay? So this is the area between perfect equality Lorenz curve and actual Lorenz curve, which is this, divided by the area under the perfect equality Lorenz curve. Okay? So 0 means perfect equality, okay, because that means that this Lorenz curve is just a 45-degree line. 1 means perfect inequality. 1 is the case where that, like this, right? So this means what? This means, except for the last household, nobody has any income, okay? Everyone else has income of 0, and only one, the last household, gets everything. That's perfect inequality, okay? So that's the case of perfect inequality of 1. Okay? So between 0 and 1. So Gini coefficient is used, okay, it's very, very often. So you will see Gini coefficient in most of the statistics of the inequality. Oh, okay. So this one, I will just explain this way. Basically, Gini coefficient is a neat way of summarizing inequality, but that's not the perfect measure. Why it's not the perfect measure? Because if you have a Lorenz curve that crosses each other, the things get a little more complicated. If the Lorenz curve does not cross each other, like the case I showed you before, then we know easily that which one is more unequal, which one is more equal. So, however, if the Lorenz curve that looks like this one, okay, then which one is more equal or which one is more unequal? Okay, Gini coefficient may be the same. Okay, if you calculate the area, okay, you may get the same number. It doesn't look like the same number, so to make it same number, so it's gonna look like, gonna look like this, for example. Okay, and then that makes the things a bit more complicated. So in this case, for example, the yellow one, lower income group has larger share of income than red income group, red Lorenz curve, right? So by looking at only this part, this may be more equal. People may say this is more equal than the red one because poorest group gets higher share. Okay, but for example, if you look at, let's say, the middle income group, okay, then this yellow one has lower share than red one. Okay, so middle income group is relatively poor, not poorer. The middle income group has relatively smaller share in the yellow society than the red society. Okay, so in this case, by looking at which part, okay, you may have different ideas. Okay? So that is the problem of the Gini coefficient as well as the problem of Lorenz curve. But Lorenz curve, by looking at the Lorenz curve itself, you may make a judgment whether this one has larger share in poorer group and larger share in middle income group or like that. But if you look at on the Gini coefficient, you will never look at what's going on behind the Gini coefficient. Okay. You may see the Gini coefficient doesn't change at all, but it is possible that these two societies has totally different income distribution. Okay? So Gini coefficient is very useful, but that's not the only measure of income inequality. Okay? So people do use different measure of income inequality. I will show you quite a few minutes later. Okay, before that, let's look at the Gini coefficients, international Gini coefficient. So this shows the Gini coefficient of OECD countries 2010. Okay? So all these dots shows the Gini coefficient. Okay, there are two definitions of income. Okay, this one is before tax and transfers. Okay? So this is called the market income. Okay? And the vertical axis shows after tax and transfers. Okay? Because most of the tax is progressive, income tax is progressive, and transfers are made more transfers are made to the poorest income group. Okay? After tax and transfers, the income distribution must be more equal or unequal. It must be more equal. Okay? So it's not surprising that all the points, okay, are below the 45-degree line. So 45-degree line basically means the market income distribution and disposable income distributions are same. So that means there is no tax and transfers. Okay? But after tax and transfers, disposable income distribution should become more equal than market income distribution. So that's why all the points are below the 45-degree line. Okay. And what it shows that according to OECD statistics 2010, before tax and transfers, Korea is the most equal country. Okay? So market income distribution, Korea has the Gini coefficient about like 0.34 or something. Okay? Which is much lower than most other OECD countries. Very equal society in terms of market income. But if you look at the disposable income, okay, Korea is like what? About the middle. Okay? You see? Okay. So for example, like these countries has like a much more unequal market income distribution, but after tax and transfers, it has much more equal distribution than Korea. Okay? So what it means? It means I think this means two things, in my opinion. One, Korea is not that unequal society, okay, in terms of Gini coefficient. Okay? At worst, it's like in the middle, basically, according to OECD statistics. Okay? Second, Korea's tax and transfers do not much to change the income distribution. Okay? As you can see, is Korea is very close to the 45-degree line. Okay? That means Korea's market income distribution and disposable income distribution are pretty much the same. Okay? So tax and transfers do not change much. And compared to Korea, like these countries, obviously, okay, changes a lot. Okay, their Gini coefficient for market income is like 0.45, but after tax is only 0.25. What country is this? Let me see. I can. Okay, if I see the data, here is the data. So like Sweden, for example, before tax is 0.44, after tax is 0.27. There is a big drop. Okay, so Norway, a lot of Northern European countries are like that. So their market income distribution is pretty unequal, but after tax and transfer, because they have high tax, high transfer. So that makes a big difference in income distribution. Germany, like 0.45, so it's very high in terms of market income distribution inequality, but after tax, it's become 0.29. So Korea is 0.31. So it becomes more equal than Germany, than Korea. The Germany becomes more equal. So a lot of countries are like that. One reason is that the OECD countries, mostly European countries, and European countries has very high income, very high tax and high transfer. But even United States has 0.49 to 0.5, but after tax and transfer 0.38. So it changes big difference. United States is unequal compared to Korea in both dimensions, but still the tax and transfers changes Gini coefficient a lot. I think this made the news a few weeks ago, I think. Okay? A few weeks ago, I have seen news reports saying that Korea's tax and transfers is like most ineffective in terms of correcting income inequality in the OECD. Okay? So Korea is low tax, low transfer country. Okay? So if you go to OECD website, statistics website, you will see other statistics, but this is very interesting one. Okay, so we have seen the Gini coefficient. Another one is the historical trend of Gini coefficient. I showed you international comparison. Historical trend of Gini coefficient of Korea, what you see is that from 1990 to 2013, this is only for the urban households of people of 2 persons or more. Okay? It does not have a statistic for single person household. There's 2 persons or more. What you can see is overall the Gini coefficient has been increasing. Okay? So from about early 1990s, 92, 93, okay, it starts increasing. And this one, there was a big increase because there was a financial crisis. Okay? And this financial crisis obviously hit lower income group much more, okay, harshly than the higher income group. Okay? If all the income group were hit to the same degree, then Gini coefficient should not jump that much. Okay? It jumps. That means that lower income group were the hardest hit by the financial crisis of 1997. And after the financial crisis and after recovery, obviously the Gini coefficient have become, kind of come back to the kind of normal trend. Okay, there was a big jump, but it goes back to normal trend. And anyway, the trend has been basically increasing, ups and downs, but it's basically increasing. So early 1990s, Korea's Gini coefficient, okay, this is for the market income, this is for the disposable income. Okay? So for the market income, for like a 0.25 around, and 2008, I think this is 2009, it became 0.32. And what is interesting is actually, since 2009, the Gini coefficient has been decreasing. So it has become more equal for the last like about 5 years. Okay. Okay. So the historical trend shows mostly upward trend in the Gini coefficient. Okay. For the past like 20 years. Okay. Okay. And another thing is that this difference between the Gini coefficient of market income and disposable income has become larger and larger. Okay? You see the distance? It has become larger and larger. What does it mean? It means probably Korea now has actually much more bigger transfer than 20 years ago, right? So nowadays, expansion of like welfare programs and government transfer programs, okay, it contributes to lower the Gini coefficient of the disposable income compared to Gini coefficient of market income. Okay, so this graph shows very interesting facts about inequality, income inequality of Korea, and it's decreasing. Okay. And people think people may think that, this financial crisis started the inequality trend, but as you can see, actually that's not true. The inequality trend actually started even before the financial crisis. Korea's inequality has started increasing from around like mid-1990s, or actually early 1990s. Okay? And this one just made a big jump, but actually if you just, delete it, I think the trend is pretty much the same. Okay? So this is not the cause of income inequality increase. Actually, it's just an added event. Okay, so added. It's just added, some force to increasing inequality, but that's not the cause. Okay, the cause is not the financial crisis. Cause is much more deeper than the financial crisis. Questions? Okay. So this is a very interesting picture. And one thing interesting is that this has been decreasing for the past about 5 years. What is it and why? It's difficult to say, but this is going to be an interesting topic, research topic. Why the income inequality has been decreasing for the past 5 years. Okay, so we have seen Gini coefficient, but as I said, the Gini coefficient is not the only measure or the perfect measure. Okay? The problem here is the Gini coefficient does not distinguish, okay, this type of different income distributions. Okay, so how do we fix this problem of Gini coefficient? We can use other measures. One is the variance. Okay, the variance is obviously just look at the whole distribution and how spread the distribution is. But the problem with the variance is that it is not invariant units. If you change the units, the variance will change. Okay, so like doubling everyone's income quadruples the variance. Okay, if everyone has double their income. Okay, think of variance. Variance will become quadruple of the previous number. Okay, so if everyone gets double income, actually in terms of income distribution, it should not change. If you think about it, just everyone gets double of their income. So inequality itself should not change, but variance will change. So variance is not a good measure. Sometimes people use variance. Okay, but after they fix the unit, then you can use variance. If the units are the same, the variance will be useful. In most of the documents, you will see not the variance, but coefficient of variation. Coefficient of variation is basically it's a variance. Actually, not the variance, it's a standard deviation. Square root of variance, standard deviation, divided by mean. Okay? Why do we divide by mean? Because if we divide it by mean, okay, then it's not going to change even if the unit changes. Okay? If everyone's income gets doubled, then standard deviation will be doubled, but at the same time, mean will be doubled. Okay? So the coefficient of variation would not change. Okay? So if you look at the inequality documents, sometimes you will see CV, which is coefficient of variation. Okay? In Korea, we call it 변동계수. Okay? Coefficient of variation, CV. So sometimes you use CV. But much more popular one is actually income ratio. This is much more popular than CV. Usually, Gini coefficient and income ratios are mostly, most used measures of income inequality. What is the income ratio? There is a different way of defining income ratio, but in the popular one is the ratio of incomes at two different percentiles. Okay, so as I said, something like you line the households from the poorest to the richest, okay, then you have, let's say, 10%, okay, and you have, okay, so 20%, okay, 20%, bottom 20%, top 20%, and you see the, income of bottom 20%, okay, at this level, so 20th percentile, okay, and this is 80th percentile income, okay, and you divide this number by this number, then you get 80-20 income ratio. Okay? So 80th percentile divided by income at 20th percentile. So you can think of it as what? As the high income group's income. Okay, so a measure of high income group's income. This is measure of low income group's income. Okay? So if you have this number, then top 20% gets at least this amount of income. Okay? If it's, let's say, 5 million won in Korea, or $5,000, let's say, a month in Korea, if it's this number, that means 20% gets at least $5,000, top 20%. And if it's, let's say, $2,000, okay, that means bottom 20% gets $2,000 or less. Okay? And you have 80-20 ratio, then which is basically what? 2.5. Okay? So 2.5 means what? Top 20% income is at least 2.5 times as much as bottom 20%. Because top 20% will get more than 5,000. Bottom 20% get at most 2,000. Okay? So the difference is 2.5 or higher, the ratio. Okay? So at least 2.5 times. So top 20% earns at least 2.5 times as much as the bottom 20%. So you get the same idea. So 90-10 ratio, like if you look at even richer group, even poorer group, or you get 50-10 ratio. 50 is in the middle. So this is, you can think of it as like a middle income group. Okay? 10 is the bottom group. Okay? So what's good for this income ratio? This income ratio can tell you the relative change of inequality by income groups. Okay? It is possible, for example, like 80-20 income ratio doesn't change much. Listen, 90-10 income ratio doesn't change much, but let's say 50-10 ratio has increased. So what it means? What it means is, since 90-10 ratio didn't change much, so that means highest income group did not gain much income over poorest group, but 50-10 ratio has increased means what? Middle income group has gained more compared to the bottom, the poorest group. Okay? So this one shows the changes in the income inequality by the groups, okay, income groups. Okay, so these numbers you can easily see, you can easily find in most statistics. In Korea's case, we have 80-20 percentile income ratio. Okay, so if you look at the Korea's official statistical office website, then you can find all these numbers: the Gini Coefficient, 80-20 ratio, and other numbers. And basically, the shapes are pretty much same as the Gini Coefficient. It should be similar. Okay, if it's very different, then we would be surprised. Okay, the shape must be much similar. So in early 1990s, it was 2.1. Okay, and then now it's about 2.5. Okay, so 20 years ago, about twice. Okay, so the top 20% earned at least twice as the bottom 20%, but now it's more than 2.5 times. Okay? So it became more unequal. Okay. Because this is an inequality measure, right? You should not be confused with the income growth measure. Okay? It is possible that bottom group and richest group, their income has increased over time, but richer group, their income increased faster than lower income group. Okay? Then you can see the inequality is increasing. So both are better off. Both groups are better off. Still, inequality has increased because the speed is different. Okay? Or, it may happen if, for example, like bottom group's income did not change at all, and the highest group's income has increased. And that's probably a much more serious issue. Then both groups has income increased, but for different speed. But let's say one group, their income didn't change or even fall, and the other group income has increased. Probably that's a much more serious issue than the previous one. So the inequality measure does not tell you, okay, what changed their income level itself. So to see the income level itself, you should look at the other statistics. Okay, how about the OECD countries? From OECD, we get 90-10 ratio and 90-50 ratio. So this one tells the basically relative income of highest group compared to the poorest group, and highest group compared to the middle income group. Okay? And first thing, if you pick them up and then you just plot them up, obviously it has a positive relationship, right? It should be. So 90-10 ratio, higher 90-10 ratio usually associated with higher 90-50 ratio. Okay? And then, wow. Korea is here. Korea is in the middle, basically. Okay? 90-10 ratio is about here, about 5. 5 times. 90-50 ratio, it's about 2. So 2 times. Okay, twice. Okay. And then Mexico is the worst. Okay. Mexico 90-10 ratio is 10. Okay. So richest 10% of Mexicans on at least 10 times. Okay. As much as the poorest 10%. Okay. Compared to the middle group, it's about 3 times. Okay. Other countries are basically bunched together around here. Korea is in the middle. Okay. And if you want to see other countries, I can. So. Like United States, like 6 times, 2 times. Korea is 5 times, 2 times, basically. Sweden, like 3.3, 1.7. This is obviously the disposable income ratio. And what do we have? Germany, 3.6, 1.8, something like that. Okay. So go to OECD. If you are interested, go to OECD and you may see more updated statistics there. Okay. So now from today, then when you read a newspaper or articles about income inequality, then you can understand how it is measured. And there are other measures of income inequality. Actually, there are a lot more measures of income inequality. Some are much more academic. So, but in most of the cases, generally the Gini coefficient and this inter-percentile income ratios are the most common ones. So in most times, you should be okay, to understand what's going on. Now, let's look at the wage structure, itself. So here, what we are going to look at is how this Korea's wage structure has changed. basically mostly about wage inequality. So this one shows wage inequality. Previously, when I showed you like a Gini coefficient, I showed you from 1990, but I have longer statistics from 1980. How did I actually? This is the graph that I made out of the data. I'm not going to tell you how I did it. Okay, it gets more complicated. But what it shows is basically the 90-10 hourly wage ratio. You can think of it that way. Now 90-10. So top 10% of wage earners and bottom 10% of wage earners. Okay. And two different data. What it shows is in terms of a trend, this is similar to the Gini coefficient if you look at from 1990s, right? So basically it has been increasing. Okay. Interestingly, before 1990, it has been decreasing, actually. Okay. So 1980s were decreasing income inequality. 1980s were an interesting period in Korea's history. 1980 was under military dictatorship, right? Politically. Economically, Korea did very well, actually, in 1980s. Okay. For one of the best times. It's not because the Korea's politics did well, but because they was very lucky at the time, actually. But one thing that we can, we can see here is that not only during that time, Korea has grown real fast, like 7% a year or something. That was like fantastic times. But at the same time, income inequality has decreased a lot, actually, during that time. Right? So politically, it was pretty bad times. But in terms of income inequality, actually, it was one of the best times, actually. Yeah. Well, is it because the military dictatorship government did something right? I'm not sure. But anyway, that happened. But, this one is not, it may not be due to the political thing because, I'm not going to, there it is. Oh, yeah. I'll show you later. Okay, and then if you look at, this is a college high school income difference. Okay. And what you can see is that it has been increasing. Basically, it's a very similar picture like this. Okay. So a lot of wage difference comes from the wage differential by education. Okay. So this. If you look at the textbook, page 295, figure 7-4. It shows the earnings inequality of the U.S. from 1937 to 2005. And what you see Gini coefficient 85 log wage gap, and there is 50-20 log wage gap. Log wage gap, you can think of it as the ratio, because log difference is basically it's a ratio. The pictures are actually, in a way, similar to this, but the years are different. Okay, so if you look at 7-4 figure A, up to from, let's say, 1930s to 1955, 1960, Gini coefficient has decreased in the US a lot. And then it increased since, actually it's kind of flat around 1970, and then it has been start increasing from between 1970 and 1980. Okay? So it's a similar picture, but the years are different. It has been increasing since, in Korea's case, like around from mid-1990s. In the US, it has been increasing around 1980. Okay. How about other countries? Other countries, this is the OECD country report, and this shows the income inequality increased. So what is this? Is the Is this Gini coefficient? I think this is okay, Gini coefficient. Okay, so this is the Gini coefficient 1985 and 2008. Okay, so this gray bar is the 1985 level of Gini coefficient. And then the end point is the 2008 Gini coefficient. So in most countries, it has increased. Okay? So there is very few exceptions. Just the exceptions are Turkey and Greece. Okay. Big exception. Okay. Little change. France, Hungary, Belgium, pretty much the same. Okay? Except for these 5 countries. All the other countries has increased. Gini coefficient has increased. Mexico, United States, Israel, UK, Italy, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, all the countries. Even like Sweden, right? We think that Sweden and Norway, Finland are very equal society, but it was even more equal in 1985. Okay? So in almost all the developed countries, income inequality has increased. Okay? Korea is no exception, but most countries. So what it tells us is that increasing inequality is not only our thing. Actually, it's much more widespread. Okay, so there must be a reason deeper than just our country's, case, because it's a kind of global trend. It's like a global thing that all the country has increased income inequality. So why? So the explanation cannot be local. It must be much more deeper. Okay. So the economists have looked at, their theories and data to find out that what can explain this type of, increasing income inequality, not only in one country, but across pretty much the developed world. Okay. So, and then we came up with a few explanations that are supported by economists, but not all economists. But lots of economists think that, that makes sense. Okay. Okay, before we do that, think about this diagram that how should we approach? Okay. Now, think of income inequality in terms of demand-supply model. Demand-supply model is not the only model that can explain income inequality, but it is the starting point, the important starting point. Okay, what it shows. Okay, the vertical axis is the skilled wage divided by unskilled wage. So this relative wage of skilled workers. Okay, so if it goes up, means income wage distribution has become more unequal. Relative wage goes up, then more unequal wage distribution. Relative wage falls, so relative wage of high skilled and low skilled, skilled to unskilled. Okay, think of it as like a university degree person's wage, and this is a high school wage. Okay, if it becomes more unequal, these numbers will become bigger. Okay, and what is this? First, show horizontal axis is the number of skilled workers divided by number of unskilled workers. So relative quantity of high skilled workers in the market. So relative wage of high skilled workers in the market, relative quantity of high skilled workers in the market. Okay? And simple supply demand framework, obviously that you think about it, you think of the demand for high skilled workers relative to low skilled workers should fall. So let's say relative wage, okay? So relative quantity, okay, of high skilled, if the high skilled workers become relatively more expensive, demand for high skilled workers, relative demand for high skilled workers should increase or decrease. Should increase or decrease. If this relative wage goes up, then demand for high skilled workers, relative demand for high skilled workers should increase, decrease. Should decrease, right? So, you can think of this, labor demand curve, relative labor demand curve. Relatively, you know, high-skilled workers, how much of high-skilled workers are demanded relative to low-skilled workers. Relative wage increased, demand should fall. Relative wage falls, demand should increase. How about the supply? Supply is obviously upward sloping. Why? If the relative wage is higher, then people want to become more skilled. So there will be more supply of high-skilled workers. If the relative wage is low, then people tend to, you know, what's the point of having, let's say, a university degree if the relative wage is not that high? So relative supply of high skills should decrease. This is from the human capital investment model. Okay? Basic model tells us the wage differential makes a difference. Okay? So we have supply-demand framework. So in a way, in the sense that this is like equilibrium relative wage, and this is an equilibrium relative quantity. Okay? Now, if relative wage has increased, okay, and if you look at the supply and demand framework, okay, the answer should be something like supply should shift left or right. If WR to increase, it should shift to the left, okay? If relative supply of high-skilled workers has decreased, then you can say, oh, yeah, relative wage will increase because, you know, their supply, for some reason, let's say if we, you know, move this way, then relative wage should increase, okay? That's not a, you know, bad way of looking at it, okay? It's a simple, very basic economics, you know, model. Okay, but what happened? In reality, did supply decrease? So it means that across developed countries, the supply of more educated people have decreased relative to less educated people. It's not true, right? If you look at Korea, right, compared to 20 years ago, we have a lot more people who have university education. 20 years ago, actually, 20 years ago, only about 30% of the total labor force has university education. Now we have, I forgot the number, but it's much more than 30%. Okay? So what does it mean? Actually, in reality, supply actually increased. Okay? Now, supply increased, so which means that actually relative wage should fall. Okay? But in reality, relative wage did not fall, right? Relative wage has actually increased. So what should have happened? What should have happened? Demand should increase. Demand should increase to enough to compensate for the increase of supply of high-skilled workers. So this is a very simple observation. So basically this one is the idea. So supply curve shift to the right. Okay. So if the demand curve didn't change at all, then equilibrium should change from E0 to E1. So relative wage should fall. Okay. And then this may happen in this way. Okay. So let's say before 1990s, okay, relative supply of high-skilled workers has increased. So from E0 to E1. So demand didn't change much. So then we experienced the fall in the inequality. Okay? But from 1990s, something happened. Mid 1990s, okay, supply has increased further, but now the inequality has increased. So that means demand must have shifted up. Okay? So not only in our case, actually, if you look at any other developed countries, basically this is the picture. Supply has increased, but wage inequality has increased. That means demand should have increased. Okay? So the explanation that economists think is the demand side, not the supply side. Because supply side is pretty much, supply has increased, we know. So there must be an explanation from the demand side. Okay. That one we will look at from next week. Okay? So this is it for today.